Hello, and welcome to the SMU Video Archive Series. In this series, we interview members of the SMU community who can provide insight into the history of SMU, especially from the perspective of their time. I'm Gillian McCombs, Central University Librarian, and today we have with us SMU alumna Frances Ware. Frances, welcome.
Thank you, Jill.
I have in front of me a wonderful article that was published in the Dallas Morning News about 6 months ago, and it's about you and the 3,000 family letters that you have in your attic. And it just describes who you are, and let me just read it so our audience will have you in context. Frances Golden Ware has lived all her life within the shadow of Southern Methodist University, where her grandmother was an early dean and her mother taught music. And Mrs. Ware has decided that her family's letters, her 3,000 letters, should be archived at the DeGolyer Library. So, Frances, tell us about these letters and your life here in the SMU campus.
I have a very strong association with SMU because it began when I was born. My mother was teaching here, and my grandmother was Dean of Women here the year that I was born. And before that, my grandfather had been an early mayor of Dallas at the time when Dallas was vying with Fort Worth to get SMU in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone in the family was associated with SMU. And these letters reflect a lot of that history.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they happened to be kept, but they were, and I gathered them from 2 or 3 different attics. And when I discovered I had them, I realized they were very interesting and should be kept and passed down, particularly since we no longer write letters.
That's absolutely true.
So I know a lot of funny, strange things about the beginnings of the university because of my parents. And one of the things that I was involved in was McFarland Auditorium.
And that's where we are today. This
Yes.
is McFarland Auditorium. This is
We
the
are
basement.
in McFarland Auditorium. When it was completed, I was about 2.5 or maybe 3 years old. Dr. Paul Van Catwick was the dean of the music school, and everyone was very excited and thrilled to be moving from Dallas Hall to this wonderful facility.
And about what year was this?
I think this was in 1926.
Okay.
I was just a small child, of course, but I knew everyone in the faculty because my mother had already been teaching here since 1919,
Mm-hmm.
and she had been teaching at home
Mm-hmm.
and also in Dallas Hall. We lived at 3512 University Boulevard. When the school was allowed to move to McFarland, when the music school was given all of this wonderful space,
Mm-hmm.
Dean Van Catwick was having a difficult time assigning the spaces to the faculty members. So they all met together and agreed that if I would draw numbers out of a hat, that they would be satisfied with their assignment.
And you were how old?
I was about 2.5 or 3.
3 years old.
And that was what happened. Dr. Van Cadwick passed a hat to me, and I drew numbers out of the hat. And as fortune would have it, I drew the most beautiful space for my own mother. It was on the second floor. It occupied the entire northeast corner of the building. It had a wonderful exposure on two sides. Beautiful tall windows, and it was a very large space. And of course, Mother was thrilled, and the remarkable thing about it was that no one complained.
Isn't that
Mrs.
something?
Van Cadwick had to climb 3 flights of stairs to her studio, but she never complained about it. Continued to love my mother, continued to love me, and my mother occupied that studio until she retired in 1957.
Oh, my goodness. So she taught from 1919 to 1957. My goodness.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So she was teaching here when you came.
Yes, she was. I have learned since then, and since my mother has been gone, her pupils have told me that they called my mother's studio Mrs. Golden's Perfection Parlor.
Oh, my goodness.
Because they wouldn't have dared go without their memory work.
Mm-hmm.
They loved her and respected her and wanted to do well. So she had this beautiful space. I was reading in some of the letters last night, Jill, I went over some of them, that her studio was divided in half in 1954 because they were
short of
needing
space.
more space.
Yeah.
And she began to share the space with Dr. Philip Williams, who was a teacher of violin. But until that time, she had room for a grand piano, a sofa, 4 chairs, a little English secretary, a little side table. And I think what might interest you is that as a child, I would sit in the open windows of my mother's studio and look out to the east, where I could see among weeds and Johnson grass a sign that said, "Site for Library."
Isn't that something? So it was planned all that time.
Yes,
Because it wasn't until 1940 that the Fondren Library was built. Yeah. So that is a
That's
long
right.
time that
Yes,
sign stood
yes. Well, I had a very close relationship with all of the faculty members because all of them lived up and down University Boulevard.
there. And of course your grandmother was Dean of Women, too.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's true. And she was asked to be Dean of Women probably after the dormitories were built. They felt they needed a Dean of Women when they had women students here. They had had women students before, but the population was sure to increase with dormitories.
Right, right.
And it was approved by the Board of Trustees, but President Seligman just asked my grandmother at a social function if she would be the Dean of Women.
And this was a social function of the church, the Methodist Church?
I really don't know, but she tells about it in one of the letters. And she had been widowed for quite some time and was selling life insurance for the Southwestern Life Insurance Company. And she says in this letter, I won't earn as much money as Dean of Women at SMU, but I want to do it because I feel that I will collect in love what I lack in income.
That's wonderful.
And she was a very beloved dean, and there is a dormitory named for her now, Mary Hay Hall.
That's right. That's right. I had not put the two and two together. That's wonderful. Now, your father was also involved early on in the university's life.
Yes.
And in fact had an important role to play, I believe, in getting one of our presidents.
Yes, true. When President-Selectman was made bishop, it was necessary to get a new president for the school. And my father had been the best friend, or was the best friend, of Humphrey Lee, who had been pastor of the Highland Park Methodist Church. At that time, it was Highland Park Methodist Church, not Highland Park United Methodist Church. Dr. Lee had felt that he might be in line for bishop of the Methodist Church, and it was known to the inner circle that he really did not want to be made a bishop, and he didn't know how to graciously refuse it. So he took a post at Vanderbilt as dean of the theology school, and that was where he was when President-Selectman retired. So the Board of Trustees asked my father to make a secret mission to Nashville to interview as a friend Humphrey Lee and find if he would be interested or willing to come back to Dallas to be president of the university.
Because your father and Humphrey Lee were good friends, fishing buddies?
Fishing, yes. And my father was also his attorney.
Oh, my goodness.
So there was a very close relationship there. But the visit was positive, and Humphrey Lee came here as president. And everyone in Dallas was thrilled because everyone knew Humphrey Lee as having been pastor of the large church. And it was marvelous for the university.
I bet.
He was a splendid man and very academically oriented. And his homilies were wonderful. Chapel was required. I can't remember. I think it was required once a week when I first began to come here as a student. And Dr. Lee always gave a homily at chapel, and you came away inspired.
Isn't that something?
Wanting to do better.
Now tell me, you came to the university in what, 1940?
Yes.
Did you ever think about going anywhere else other than Southern Methodist?
Yes, I did. My family told me that I could go away to school, but war was approaching. The country was apprehensive, and travel did become very difficult after 1941, after Pearl Harbor. We had gasoline rationing, tire rationing. If you were driving a car, you were only allowed to drive at 30 miles an hour. So I elected to stay at home because I knew that if I went away, I would not be coming back just any time. You know, I would probably stay away.
Not coming home for Thanksgiving and so on.
No. Of course, air travel was just, well, we didn't it was not not there. So, rather than risk not getting home but once a year, I elected to stay at SMU.
And your major was English?
English and education. And I got a teacher certificate, which I used. I taught in the Highland Park schools and then later in the Oklahoma City schools.
Now, I believe when you were here, the Arden Club was one of the popular things to join.
Yes. Well, I remember the Arden Club from the beginning. Miss McCord was the drama teacher, and she put on Shakespearean plays on the steps of Dallas Hall. And the audience would sit on folding chairs in front of the steps of Dallas Hall. I think the lighting was probably primitive, but it was wonderful because I'm thinking it must have been in the summertime because it stayed light pretty long.
And it was 100 degrees out there?
Yes, and there were chiggers out there and probably mosquitoes. But we didn't care because if you were in the Arden Club, you were a very talented person. Miss McCord knew how to pick her actors and actresses, and the performances were excellent, and it was like a Greek theater with the actors and actresses coming from behind the columns at Dallas Hall and walking down the steps and pacing to and fro, and really not much scenery was required. It was all very dramatic to begin with.
Did you ever play in one of these plays?
Oh, yes, I did. When Miss McCord was in the habit of choosing some of the faculty children to be in her productions. And she gave a production of The Pied Piper of Hamelin. And I was tall for my age, so I was selected to be the little lame boy from The Pied Piper of Hamelin. And I remember that I had a terrible crush on the Pied Piper.
Who played the Pied Piper?
I can't remember, but he was very good looking. And I had a few lines to say, but I was such an actress. The curtain opened and I was supposed to be asleep in the place where the Pied Piper had lured the children, and there were other children around, of course. And I was center stage with the Pied Piper, and something got into my head, and I can remember it to this day. I thought, I will really be asleep. I will have to wake up. So I can remember the Pied Piper leaning over and saying, Frances, it's time to it's time to wake up. Say your lines. Because
Did you wake up?
I woke up. But the curtains had been open for a while, and the audience was very patient. Oh, they were very kind.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, you told me also that there was a Forest of Arden.
Yes, there
on
was
campus.
a Forest of Arden. It was located between the edge of the campus and where the church began.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lovely little grove of trees. We had picnics there, and it was just, it was so lovely. And a little bit of it remains, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But
Is it sort of near the parking lot?
Yes,
Near
but
where the
it's
church
where
is?
the Perkins School
Okay,
now has
yes.
grown so much
Yes,
that
yes.
it took up most
Mhm.
in their dormitories
Mhm.
there now. Where
Mhm.
So Arden Forest had to give away.
That's a shame. That's a shame. All students like some sort of little nook or place that they can go to get
Yes.
away from their classes and so on.
Yes.
Now, you were telling me earlier that Perkins Administration Building had smaller origins. What was
Oh,
in place
yes.
then?
The place was the co-op,
Mm-hmm.
and the co-op was a tiny little flat roof building. I suppose it had the same dimensions that it does now. It's where it became the first floor of the administration
Mhm.
building.
Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't anything above the first floor.
Mm-hmm.
And in this one little space was the bookstore,
Mm-hmm.
a soda fountain,
Mm-hmm.
a few booths, and a very small place to go back and forth from one door to
Mhm.
the other.
Mhm.
But everyone managed to crowd into the co-op
Mhm.
at 12 o'clock at the end of classes and meet and greet each
Mhm.
other.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a small school, so of course it was wonderful.
How many students were there when you were here?
Do you know? I don't
Yeah.
know, but it was not a large school.
Mhm.
It began to be very large after World War II.
Mhm.
People began to come,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when they really needed all of the dormitories, and they had the prefabs. But I left before the prefab
Mm-hmm.
dormitories.
Now, you came in 1940, and that was the year that the Fondren Library opened, the first air-conditioned library in North America.
Yes.
So tell me, did everyone like to go study in the library?
We loved the library, and it became a favorite meeting place. You would go and check your book out, and your sweetheart maybe would go to the library too and sit a few tables away, and then, after a time, you'd close the book and leave the library and go to the co-op.
Of course.
But it was a wonderful, wonderful place.
Now,
We
the
were very happy with
The librarian then has a reputation on campus for having named the Mustangs team, for having named Peruna. Do you have any memories of her?
Miss Almond.
Yes.
Yes, I do. I remember that she seemed to know everything, Jill.
How wonderful to have that reputation.
Well, she was always very helpful and kind and generous to all of the students. It didn't matter whether you were, Phi Beta Kappa material or just a struggling freshman. She was helpful to everyone, and she seemed to love the school.
Good.
I know that she did.
Well, it certainly seems that way from everything that I've read about her. Tell me about some of your professors. You mentioned a couple to me, Professor McGinnis.
Yes. I was very fortunate to have Dr. John McGinnis for Shakespeare. Dr. McGinnis was legendary. He loved to act the plays, and he did so in front of the class so that we'd get the entire feeling and meaning of the passage in Shakespeare. And he was wonderful about explaining the meaning of the Old English language, you know, that we were not, a person would not necessarily know. That was why we were in Shakespeare. But he would pace in front of the class, quoting the lines. And when he took a female part, he would remove his handkerchief from his top coat pocket and flourish it a bit and walk up and down and pace. And really, you could just imagine him being that person. He had such a wonderful way of expressing the feeling.
Hallmark of a great teacher.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you had also told me some interesting stories about your family when you were growing up. You seem to have had very strong role models. For instance, I understand that your grandmother told your mother that she needed to go to Europe to finish her education, and that your father, who was a lawyer, had to stay home and look after you.
That is true. And
that is unusual at that
yes,
that
it
time.
is. It was very unusual because I was only about 2 years old. But my grandmother felt that because my mother was teaching in a university, she needed to study in London and Paris. And so it was arranged, and my father agreed to take care of me, and my mother left with 3 students and another professor who was with them for a while. But they traveled by ship to London, and there my mother and her 3 students, and my mother was so young at the time. I think she probably was about 30. So it's hard to believe that she was chaperoning these young women. But she did. And she studied oratorio in London.
Of course, the
And
Handel's
then-
Messiah.
Yes, yes, because she was teaching the voices
right.
for the oratorio. And she also then went to Paris, and the way she found the teacher was just amazing to me. And Jill, I have it in the letters.
So you have the proof.
I have the proof. She and the 3 young ladies went to the opera. And while they were at the opera, one of the young ladies turned to someone sitting next to her and said, "I'm here with my voice teacher, and we are all wanting to study here while we're in Paris. and we're looking for teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they had very good seats at the
Mm-hmm.
opera.
Mm-hmm.
So this person was a very knowledgeable person and recommended a teacher
Isn't that wonderful?
who my mother found,
Mm-hmm.
and she studied with him
Mm-hmm.
while she was in Paris all summer
Mm-hmm.
studying and learning repertoire
Mm-hmm.
for opera. And
And meanwhile, your
And
father was at home taking
taking
care
care
of
of
you?
me.
And your grandmother was
good.
busy being Dean of Women.
Right. That's exactly right. I was looking back on some of the old campuses that I have, the newspapers. This was reported in one of them.
And the campus was the forerunner of the daily campus, is that
Right.
right? Uh-huh.
That's right. It seemed that the girls, now this was much before my time,
Mm-hmm.
not before my time on campus,
Mhm.
but before my time as a student.
Mm-hmm.
The girls were not allowed to go in the special trains to football games. It was in the days when they were still being chaperoned.
Mhm.
Everything was very proper.
Mm-hmm.
And on one occasion, a committee of young ladies petitioned my grandmother to let them go on the special train to
Mhm.
Bryan, Texas. They
Mhm.
wanted to go to the A&M football
Mm-hmm.
game. Well, the campus reports that my grandmother said, well, I would love to go. I wouldn't miss it for anything. So she went with all of them.
That's wonderful.
She got around that request
Uh-huh.
by just going with them. No one could complain.
Did you participate in homecoming or running
Oh,
for
yes.
elections?
Oh,
You did?
yes. Our political situation on the campus was not complex at all.
Uh-huh.
We took our jobs very seriously, but the campaigns were just full of fun and
Mhm.
frolic.
Mhm.
And I did run for office twice,
Mhm.
once for representative of the School of Arts and Sciences, and then again as secretary
Mhm.
for the student council.
Mhm.
I can't remember my campaign except that we all wanting a student union.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my campaign promise, was that I would work so that the students could have a student union.
And how were you going to do that?
I had no idea.
Did you get elected?
I got elected.
Did you manage to get the student union?
Well, it came after I graduated,
Uh-huh.
not too long after I graduated. We got Humphrey Lee Student Center.
That's right. That's right.
And, but of course, it was, I had no idea. We had no idea of how to go out and raise money for it. It was just a lovely thought, and I suppose we were going to talk to, well, we did. The administration knew that we
Sure.
wanted, so that was all we could do, was to put pressure on the administration for a student union bill.
Now, you told me a couple of days ago about some of the activities that your friends engaged in order to get their slates approved. I seem to remember you talking about an elephant was involved.
Yes. On one campaign for the election of the editor of the Rotunda, a wonderful young man named Bill Barnes ran for editor. And Bill was a very tall, imposing, but large, fellow, and he used as his slogan, "Rotund Barns for Rotunda," and he put a large banner all the way around the rotunda of Dallas Hall, which spelled this out. And he somewhere got a real elephant and brought it on campus and paraded the elephant around.
Isn't that something?
And the elephant had a saddle blanket. I'm not sure what those little houses on
the howdah.
Howdah, yes. But the little blanket or the cloth that was under the howdah had rotund barns for rotunda.
Was he successful?
No, he wasn't. But an independent one, and
now, what do you mean by independent?
well, he was not a member of a fraternity.
Okay.
And they had an organization, the Independent Students Association. And the sororities and the fraternities would get a slate. And there were two opposing slates. And we call them combines. And the different sororities and fraternities would combine together to make a political party. And we gave speeches and passed out flyers, but it was just fun. But then when we took our jobs seriously, that was entirely different.
Now, I understand you were also involved in homecoming here a few years back.
Oh, yes.
Did it have something to do with throwing a baseball or something?
A
football.
Yes.
So tell me about that.
Well, I was selected to be the representative for the War Years Memorial. And they, my friends in the alumna and the Alumni Association told me that I was going to have to throw the football.
And this was what, in 1998, was this, or 97?
This would have been, it wasn't very long ago, 1996.
96,
I said, I'm not sure I can do that. And they said, oh, yes, you can. And I had no idea what they had in mind for me until I came to the arena that afternoon. We were at the Cotton Bowl. And I was given a jersey that said 44. I'll keep it forever. And I was told that I would go to center field with the president, President Turner, and after the toss would throw the football to Roger Staubach. Well, I did. They had told me that I was going to have to throw the football, so I had practiced for a while with a bunch of little neighborhood boys. They got a big kick out of it.
I bet they did.
Well, I managed to do it pretty well. It came off very successfully. I think I threw the ball about 10 yards, really. And Roger caught it, and afterwards autographed it.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? So you have the ball?
I have the football.
Autographed by him. Well, isn't
autographed
that
by Roger Staubach.
What a treasure.
He wrote Go Navy.
Go Navy.
And then love Roger.
Yes.
To Frances, love Roger.
Well, did you go to the games in Ownby Stadium?
Oh, yes. We never missed a game at Ownby Stadium because we were within walking distance of it. So I walked. My father loved football games. We came to every one. And I was sorry and glad to see Ownby Stadium go. It's
Did you get a
now.
brick?
No, I didn't get
That's
a
too
brick.
bad. That's too
Yes, it is. But I have many memories of Ownby Stadium and the bonfires. We had bonfires
Really?
too. Yes, at homecoming. They were what? They were Meadows School is. It was on the east side of what is now Bishop Boulevard. Far enough from Ownby Stadium. But you see, the buildings were far away too.
Right.
There wasn't anything.
Right.
There wasn't any structure that would have been jeopardized. And so the boys always built a bonfire, and we were always, sometimes the opposing team would burn it, you know, before before time.
Oh my goodness. Now, I also remember you telling me about how faculty members were paid in the early
Oh
years.
yes,
The
well,
coupon
I only knew about my mother. I'm sure that it applied to the other people in the music school who were giving private lessons. Mother was not given a salary. She taught on commission. And fortunately, she had a large class all of the time. But the students would enroll and pay for their semester's work, and they were given coupons to take to their teacher. And then the teacher, in turn, would turn the coupons into the bursar and be paid. So I knew about this only because my mother would say on occasion, I had to send so-and-so back to the dorm today because she didn't have her coupon.
Isn't that something? Now, your mother's name was Elise Golden?
Elise Hay Golden. And she really, she was a wonderful role model too. I was very fortunate.
Now, I also heard that your father had quite a bit of a time to persuade her to leave New York and return to Texas and marry him.
Yes. She thought, and probably was right, that she might have a career in New York. And I know that she was staying at the Barbizon, which was a hotel for young ladies in New York. And my father's letters went frequently to New York. But finally she came home on a boat.
On a boat from New York?
On a boat from New York. And landed at New Orleans.
Oh, my goodness.
And he was there to meet her. He wasn't going to. She had other suitors. And he was absolutely terrified that one of them was going to snatch her away. And the other suitors were also petitioning her. But he won out. And later, and I only knew this recently, my grandmother suggested that my mother leave the university, which is just unheard of, and go to New York. And she said, in this letter, Gillian, you can just take Roscoe, that's my father, and Frances with you and go, and I think you will have your career in New York. But my mother really, she was firmly entrenched, I think, by that time.
Here at SMU?
At SMU. And also directing the choir at the church, Allen Park Methodist Church.
But that must be really wonderful to read your grandmother's letters and see how
Yes.
encouraging she was of your mother and her career.
Yes.
Yeah, especially
Right.
at that early time,
Exactly.
long before women's liberation.
Right. That's true.
Well,
Can
your connections have not ended. I believe you have a grandson who is here
Oh,
now.
yes,
at
I
SMU.
do have a grandson. Oh, I'm so happy finally to get, it's Michael Hennessy, and he is a senior, and he has taken the rag off the bush.
In other words, he's been working really hard.
Yes, he has. He really has. He's done very well. I'm very proud of him. He's a Hunt Scholar.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And of course, you're still involved. You're on the board of the Friends of the Libraries. You've been on the board of the Alumni Association.
Yes, and I've also been on the Deadman Executive Board.
That's wonderful, Frances. It really is.
Well, I enjoy it. I hope that I will always be connected with the SMU. I expect to be always connected with
Well,
SMU.
we certainly expect you to stay with us in our family. You're one of our dearest family members, and you know that.
I feel that. Yes, I do.
Well, what did you feel when you first found those 3,000 letters, when you realized what an incredible cache, an archive of your family's history?
Well, Dr. David Farmer helped me to realize that. He came over one day. I told him that I had a little small steel box that had been under my mother's bed for a long time. And I said, it has a lot of letters in it that she has tied up in ribbons. And Dr. Farmer said, well, Frances, I would like to see that. So he came, and he just was thrilled. He said, oh, this is so interesting. You must keep these. Oh, I would love to see these. Then, as I began, I said, well, Dr. Farmer, I have more. Well, he just was even more thrilled and totally astounded at what I had found in the, but it was with his encouragement that I began to take great care of them.
Now,
And-
you hired someone to help you organize them?
Yes, I did. A young woman who I met, she came to cater a meal at my house. And she told me that she had 2 small children. She was trying to send them to private school. And she was catering. And I asked her if she could come and help me one day a week, because I had decided that she would be a good person. She was very careful, and I needed someone who was careful to help me take care of the letters. And she said yes, she could come. So we started out in the garage, because that was where most of the letters were. At first, I found them in different attics, but when I moved them to my home, they had to be stored somewhere. And I had just put them in boxes in the garage. So our first duty was to get these letters out of the damp and mildew. and we brought them inside, and then we began to go through them and arrange them. And Jeffrey Scott has done a wonderful job. I want you to see them, Gillian.
Well, I have. Remember, I came with
Yes,
Kay
I know, yes.
and Judy, and you took us
Yes,
up
yes.
into your attic, and we saw everything so beautifully organized and the work that she's doing. It is amazing, Frances.
Well, we have reached the point where we're putting all of them in archival top loaders.
Mhm.
That's what they're called.
Mhm.
They fit into loose leaf notebooks,
Mhm.
and you slip the letter into the top
Mhm.
of this. It looks like plastic, but it's something better than
Mhm.
plastic because it's archival.
Mylar and stuff?
Yes, Mylar.
Yes.
Right. And so we've gotten to that point now, and all of these things are going to be off the floor, I hope.
And you also
And I
have
hope
photographs and
Yes.
and programs and newspapers.
Yes, yes, yes.
I saw an amazing photograph, I think my first week or so here that I didn't quite appreciate then, but I still always remember it, and that is Dallas Hall at the very early beginnings, about 1915, 16, and some cows.
Yes.
Sort of along Hillcrest there. And I'm sure you must have similar photographs.
Yes. Well, I don't know whether I have any that early or not, but I do have a lot of photographs of early University Park.
Uh-huh.
And there was a bank who collected early photographs of the park cities, and they sent them out with their statements, and my mother saved all of those. Mother was a great saver. I don't know how she managed to do it, Gillian. She prepared the repertoire for each student. She went over everything. She was sure that all of the songs that she was teaching would suit their capabilities.
Mhm.
And still, she managed to cut out, keep a diary, save all of this stuff.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
And now she has
Uh-huh.
really given me a job to do.
Well, it's an incredible record of the history, the life of SMU, basically
Yes.
from day one.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
it is.
Yeah.
I gave a gold pen that was hers to Bill Lively. He was doing over the alumni offices when it was on Daniels.
Mhm.
And he wanted some things for a case.
Uh-huh.
And I gave him a pen that belonged to my mother, and I think it's framed somewhere. I hope they'll find
Oh,
it.
I'm sure
it's
it is.
It's in the archive
I'm sure
somewhere.
it is, yes. Yeah.
Because they've since moved,
Mhm.
and I don't know exactly where it is now, but I'm sure it will be.
Mhm.
But it says Founders Club.
Mhm.
And my mother was a member of the Founders Club, and these pens were issued in, I think, 1912.
Yes. Yeah.
And her maiden name is on
Mhm,
it because she was not married at that
So each
time.
one is personalized?
Yes,
engraved?
it has
That's wonderful.
engraved
Uh-huh.
with the seal of the university on the
Uh-huh.
front, and it's on a little crescent. It
Mhm.
hangs on a little gold crescent,
Oh, that's wonderful.
and I think it's a locket.
Uh-huh. That's wonderful.
Hmm. But Claire
Mhm.
Roberts, do you
Mhm.
remember Claire Roberts with the? No,
Mm-mm.
okay. She was with the Alumni Association for so long.
Mhm.
Had it framed,
Yeah.
and they put it in the cabinet over.
Well, I'm sure it's probably hanging somewhere.
It's
I'll have
somewhere.
to pay attention.
We'll have to find it.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time. I have the
Okay.
feeling that we could actually just sit here and chat forever. Are there any other things that you would like to share with the world?
Well, I think that I've hit some of the high points,
Mhm.
Gillian. Of course, I remember so much. It goes over such a long span. It's hard to organize it, really. It's almost as hard to organize it. The letters are much easier to organize than my thoughts about SMU because it reaches over such a long period.
Well, I think that it's wonderful of you to share your thoughts with us today, and I'm really glad that you've kept all those things, and I'm so glad that your mother and your grandmother before you kept all those wonderful things.
Yes.
And I know that anyone who has an interest in looking at the history of SMU will be looking in all those papers and those letters that are going to be happily residing in the archives.
That's wonderful. That makes me very happy, Jill. Really, truly happy.
Good.
I feel that I've, done something.
Well, you have. You absolutely have. I mean, it's one thing for people to write these, but then they have to rely on someone like you to come along and save them, and then hand them over where they can be saved for posterity and made accessible to everybody.
Well, I think that they will be a source of pleasure and enjoyment. I really do, because they were good letters and quite fascinating. Maybe something will be written about them someday. Maybe someone will think up a story.
Well, Frances, what are you doing this weekend? Well, on that note, I think that we're ready to close the interview today with Frances Ware. Frances, I've just enjoyed being here. Thank you.
I have enjoyed it tremendously, Jill. Thank you for asking me.